It all started with a trip that I thought would be a simple, relaxing getaway. I have always been the type to crave solitude every now and then. So, when I found a small cabin, isolated, tucked away deep in the forest of the northern Arizona, I jumped at the chance to book it. The cabin was the perfect retreat off the grid, surrounded by miles of thick woods and far enough from civilization to escape all the noises of the city. I figured it would be a great way to unplug and recharge. I have been planning this trip for weeks, just me and my dog Max, who usually a pretty calm and best friend and friendly lab mates. He loved the outdoors, so I knew he had enjoyed the hiking, and I had no reason to think anything out of the ordinary would happen. He loves the outdoors, so I knew he would enjoy the hiking, and I had no reason to think anything out of the ordinary would happen. It was a Saturday when we arrived. The drive up was quiet, scenic, with the sun dipping low behind the trees, casting everything in a warm golden hue. I arrived at the cabin just as it was getting darker. The cabin itself was a quaint, rustic structure, wooden beams, a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and a couple of windows that overlooked the surrounding forest. It was perfect, except for one thing. Except for one thing, the silence. I am no stranger to the quiet of the nature, but this felt different. It wasn't a peaceful quiet, it was unsettling, like the whole forest was holding its breath for something to happen. Max seemed to sense it too. He was excited to be out of the car, but as soon as I opened the door to the cabin, he hesitated to step in. He sniffed around the air, ears spread, and I could see the hackles on his neck raised. He would have batted inside, tail wagging, but that didn't happen this time. Come on, boy, let's get settled, I said, trying to brush off the tension in the air. I spent the next hour unloading my things, making dinner, and setting up the fire in the fireplace. Max remained unusually tense, pacing around the cabin, occasionally pausing to stare into the woods outside through the windows. I couldn't help but feel that something was off. It wasn't just Max. The forest outside seemed to have a strange stillness to it, like the wind had abandoned it. There was no animal sound, no chirping of birds, or rustling of the leaves. It was as if everything was on a hold, waiting for something. After dinner, I decided to take Max out for a walk around the cabin before settling in for the night. The air was cool, but not cold. It was a typical evening in the mountains, and I had every intention of enjoying the peace. Max was still on the edge, but I figured he was just adjusting to the new environment. I attached his leash, opened the door, and stepped outside. A cold wind ran through my hair. The woods around the cabin were dense, with tall pines and scattered oaks. A narrow trail led into the trees, and I followed it, Max at my side. The trail was uneven, a mix of dirt and rocks, but nothing too difficult. It wasn't until we reached a small clearing, about 15 minutes into the walk, that things started to feel strange. Max stopped in his tracks. At first, I thought he had just smelled something, but then he started growling. Not just a playful bark or a curious noise. This was deep, guttural, the kind of growl when you hear when an animal senses something it shouldn't. Max? Max, I said, calling him softly, but he wouldn't respond. He was staring into the woods, his body rigid, his hackles raised. I called again, but louder this time, and tugged at the leash. But he refused to move. I glanced around, trying to understand what had him so worked up. The trees were still, the air thick with silence, a single rustling of leaves, or any other sound. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a shape in the distance. It was standing still, partially obscured by the trees. My first thought was that it was a person, but something was wrong. I squinted my eyes, trying to make out the figure. It was tall, far taller than any person I had ever seen, and it wasn't moving. It just stood there, facing me, perfectly still. And then I tried to call out, but my throat went dry, and no sound came out of it. Max was still growling, his eyes locked on the figure. Hey, I finally managed to shout. Are you lost? The figure didn't move, didn't respond to my calls, but something about it didn't feel right. Its stance was off. It was too still, too rigid, like it was trying to blend in with trees, but it didn't quite know how to do that. My heart began to race. My instincts told me to turn and run back to the cabin, but I froze in place, unsure of what to do. I tugged harder on Max's leash, but he didn't budge. His growling had escalated to a low, steady, and a rumble voice, his body tense with fear. Then, as if on cue, the figure moved. It wasn't a smooth motion. It was trying to walk, but it was failing it. Too stiff and too unnatural. My breath caught in my throat as it took a step forward, its limbs making an audible snapping noise with each movement. And I saw his face. It wasn't human. It was a face, yes, but it was raw, almost deadly white and pale, with deep set eyes that looked like black holes. And its mouth was stretched, wide, and gaping grin that showed far too many teeth, teeth that are looked far too sharp. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. My mind was racing and telling me to run, to get out from there. But my legs felt like they were glued to the earth. And then it did something I will never forget. It tilted its head, almost like it was trying to understand me, or worse, trying to mimic a human gesture. And that grin, It grew wider, almost too wide to be natural. I felt a wave of nausea hit me, and I stumbled back a step, finally finding my voice. What the hell are you? I managed to croak, though my voice was barely above a whisper. The thing didn't answer. Instead, it made a sound. It was like a growl, but deep and guttural, almost like it was trying to speak, but it wasn't quite capable of it. It wasn't even a noise that sounded human. Max growl became a frantic bark, and in that moment, something snapped. I grabbed the leash and yanked him away, forcing him to turn and run with me. I didn't look back. I couldn't do that. I was too scared for myself and Max. I ran fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest, ears ringing with the sound of Max's frantic barking. I didn't stop until we were safely back inside our cabin. Max was shaking, breathing heavily, and still whimpering. I shut the windows, locked them quickly, whatever it was, still out there, and I could feel it. The rest of the night was a blur. I stayed by the fire, trying to convince myself that I had just seen some weird animal, or maybe a hallucination. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. It was no animal, it wasn't even human. I'm sure of that. It wasn't until later when I started hearing scratching noises on the wall and the windows that I realized the terror wasn't over. The thing was still out there, watching and waiting to me to get outside again. But I stayed awake all night, unable to sleep, too scared to leave the cabin. Max wouldn't stop growling, his eyes constantly darting towards the window. I don't know how long I stayed there like that. When the morning came, I was a shell of myself, exhausted, terrified, and still processing what I had seen before. I packed up my things in a daze and left the cabin as quickly as I could. I couldn't bring myself to stay another minute in there. I still don't know what I saw that night, but I am sure of one thing. It was a skinwalker. I have heard the stories, the legends, but I never believed them until now. Whatever it wasn't human, and it wanted something. I'm not sure what, but I wasn't about to find out. I have told a few people about it, but no one believed me, and I don't blame them. Who would? I barely believed it myself, but I will never forget that face and the experience that happened to me. And now, every time I go to sleep, I feel like I am being watched, even inside my home.
I want to share something really scary that happened to me recently. It was last Friday night, and I was just finishing up dinner with my family. The night was calm and quiet, and I remember feeling relaxed after a long week at work. Little did I know things were about to take a turn for the worse. It was around 10 p.m. when I heard a loud crash from the back of the house. At first, I thought maybe something had fallen over in the garage, but then I heard voices, muffled and urgent. My heart started racing as I realized something was wrong. I quietly got up from the dinner table and peeked out the window. The window looked towards back of the house. Suddenly, I saw two moving figures in the dark. There were two men wearing dark hoodies trying to force open the back door. My mind went blank for a moment, and then fear kicked in. I knew we were going to be robbed. I rushed back to the dining room where my wife and kids were, trying to stay calm for their sake. Call the police, I whispered to my wife urgently. She nodded, her eyes wide with fear, and she dialed 911. Meanwhile, I quickly ushered my kids into a nearby room, trying to keep them quiet and calm. My hands were shaking as I locked the door behind us. Outside, the voices were getting louder and louder. I could hear them now, shouting to each other in hushed tones. It felt like an eternity before we heard the sirens approaching. The police arrived quickly. They surrounded the house and entered cautiously, guns drawn. I felt a mix of relief and fear as I heard shouting and commotion from outside. My wife was still on the phone with the dispatcher, explaining what was happening. The kids were scared and clinging to me, asking if everything would be okay. I did my best to reassure them, but inside I was terrified too. After what seemed like forever, the police emerged from the house with two men in handcuffs. They had caught them red handed, trying to steal our valuables. I felt a rush of emotions, relief that they were caught, anger that they had invaded our home, and gratitude that we were all safe in the end. The police took statement from us and reassured us that everything would be okay now. They were incredibly professional and kind throughout the whole ordeal. I couldn't thank them enough for their quick response and bravery. As the adrenaline wore off, I realized how lucky we were. Things could have been much worse. We were shaken up and scared, but physically unharmed. The house was a mess. Drawers pulled out, cabinets open, but the damage was minimal compared to what it could have been. That night, we stayed with our friends. It took us a while to feel safe in our own home. We installed better security measures and talked to our kids about what had happened. It was a hard conversation, but an important one. Looking back, I am grateful for so many things. Grateful that we were all together when it happened. Grateful for the support of our friends and neighbors. And grateful that the police were able to catch the two guys before anyone got hurt. It's been a week now, and we were starting to move on. We were more cautious now, always double checking the logs and keeping an eye out for anything suspicious. But we were also stronger as a family, knowing that we can get through tough times together. I hope none of you ever have to experience something like this. It's terrifying and unsettling, in way I can't fully describe. But if you ever do find yourself in a similar situation, remember to stay calm, call for help, and hold your loved ones closer. And be grateful for every moment of safety and security you have. This experience happened to me and my partner. It was supposed to be a fresh start for both of us, a new home in a new neighborhood. But what began as a excitement quickly turned into a harrowing experience that forced us to reconsider our choices. My partner and I had just moved into our new home on a sunny Saturday morning. The neighborhood seemed quiet enough during the day, with families out walking their dogs and children playing in nearby yards. We were optimistic about our decision, eager to settle in into our first home together. As evening approached, we started unpacking boxes and arranging furniture, lost in the excitement of making our new home feel like our own. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a long shadows across our street. That's when we began to notice subtle signs that was not as idyllic as it seems. We shrugged it off and went back to our unpacking. After a while of unpacking things and moving furniture, we were quite tired. We both took a bath and sit down for our dinner. Around 9 p.m., we heard raised voices coming from the street outside. Curious, we peeked through the curtains to see a group of young adults gathered on the sidewalk, arguing loudly. They seemed too agitated, gesturing angry at each other before disappearing into the darkness. We exchanged uneasy glances but reassured each other that every neighborhood had its downsides. It was probably just a misunderstanding. We reasoned with that. We continued our dinner. After that, we returned to unpacking our things, hoping that commotion was an isolated incident. But our hopes were shattered later that night. Around midnight, we were jolted awake by the sound of breaking glasses. My partner and I shot upright in the bed, hearts pounding with fear. We listened intently, straining to hear any further noises from outside. Seconds stretched into minutes of tense silence before the sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel reached our ears. Panic surged through us. We realized someone was outside our house, moving stealthily. We lay frozen in our bed, daring to breathe. Suddenly, our bedroom door cracked open slowly. My partner stifled a gasp as a shadow figure stepped into the room. Adrenaline surged through me as I reached for the bedside lamp, ready to defend ourselves. But before I could react, a voice spoke out in a low, menacing tone. Stay quiet, and no one gets hurt. The intruder hissed, their voice rough and unfamiliar. My partner clutched my arm tightly, tears veiling her eyes. We exchanged a look of terror, silently communicating our shared dread. The intruder moved closer, their presence looming over us like a dark cloud. They demanded money and other valuables, their words laced with menace. My mind raced with fear and confusion. How had our dream of a new home turned into a nightmare so quickly? With trembling hands, I managed to reach for my phone, hoping to call for some help. But the intruder saw my movement and lunged forward, snatching the phone from my grasp. They warned us against any further attempt to resist, their threats chilling us to the bone. For what felt like an eternity, we complied with their demands, handing over whatever valuables we had. The intruder moved swiftly and methodically, ransacking our belongings in search of more and more. Each passing moment felt like an eternity. Our sense of security shattered beyond any repairing. Finally, the intruder fled into the night, leaving us shaken and vulnerable. We huddled together in the darkness, the weight of what had just happened sinking. My partner trembled in my arms, her breathing coming in shallow gasps. We called the police immediately, our voices trembling as we recounted the terrifying incident. Officers arrived swiftly, their presence a reassuring beacon in our hour of need. They listened attentively, taking statements and assessing the scene for any evidence. In the days that followed, we struggled to come to terms with what had just happened. Our once promising new home now felt tainted by fear and uncertainty. We couldn't shake the feeling of being violated. Our sense of safety shattered. Neighbors offered sympathetic nods and murmured assurance, sharing their own concern about the neighborhood's decline. It became clear that our experience was not an isolated one, but part of a larger pattern of crime and unrest in the area. With heavy hearts, my partner and I made the difficult decision to move out. We couldn't bear the thought of living in constant fear, always looking over our shoulders. Our dream of a fresh start had been shattered, replaced by a deep seated unease. As we packed our belongings and said goodbye to the house in that troubled neighborhood, we vowed never to forget the lesson we learned. Safety and security are not to be taken for granted. Sometimes the best choice is to listen to our instincts and prioritize our well being above all other things. Hope you guys like this story. If you like them, please consider subscribing to this channel and check out other videos in this channel too. Like them, share them, and don't forget to enable the bell icon so you don't miss new uploads. And also, if you have any suggestions or any improvements I need to make in this channel, please post them in the comment section. So, till next time, this is Malayali WENDIGO. Bye. I am not really into ghost stories or anything like that, but something happened to me last year that I still can't explain. I figured I had shared my experience and see if anyone out there has had similar experience like that. Last summer, I was working as a security guard at an old abandoned hospital on the edge of town. I had taken the job as a way to make some extra cash over the summer break from my university. The hospital had been shut down over for a decade, and it was known for being creepy and, well, a little bit haunted. I was never one to believe in ghosts, but working there was unsettling to say the least. The job was pretty straightforward. My main responsibility was to walk the hallway every couple of hours and make sure nobody was breaking in or messing around. I worked the night shift, which ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The building was huge, with 4 floors, and there were plenty of dark corners and empty rooms. One night, things took a turn for the eerie. I started my shift as usual, making my rounds and checking the security cameras. The hospital was silent as ever, and the only sound was the occasional drip of water from a leaky pipe somewhere in the building and the windows cracking open in the wind. It was quiet, but it was a sort of unnerving quiet that made the hair on my back of my neck stand up. Around midnight, I was walking down the long, narrow hallway on the second floor when I noticed something strange. There was a door at the end of the hallway that had been locked, but now the door was slightly ajar, with just enough space to see into the darkness beyond it. I walked up to the door and pushed it open, half expecting to see something or someone in there. But there was nothing. The room was empty except for a few old dusty medical equipment scattered around in it. I checked the door's lock to make sure it was still intact, but everything seemed normal. I locked the door back up and continued on my rounds, trying to shake off the weird feeling that had started to creep in. A couple of hours later, while I was in the basement checking the storage rooms, I heard a strange noise coming from the stairwell. It was like a faint, echoing cry or a moan. I stood still for a few minutes, straining to hear it again, but it was gone, like it was never there. I walked up the stairs to investigate, but when I got to the landing, there was no one there, and nothing seemed out of place. The noise was so soft that I wondered if I had imagined it. I finished my rounds on the basement and went back up to the second floor. As I walked down the hallway again, I noticed the door at the end of the hall was ajar once again. My heart started to race. I knew I had locked it, but now somehow it was open. I took a deep breath and walked into the room, determined to check it out. The room was just as empty as before, but there was something off. It felt colder than the rest of the building. I shined my flashlight around and noticed a large old mirror on side of the room, but it was covered in dust, and the surface was so dirty that it was hard to see my reflection. I took a few steps closer to the mirror, and that's when I noticed something strange. In the dim light of my flashlight, I could see a shadow figure behind me in the mirror. It looked like a person standing there, but when I turned around, the room was empty. I spun back to the mirror quickly, but the shadow was gone, and I can see no one behind me in the mirror. I tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light or imagination of my disturbed mind. But the chill in the room was undeniable. I walked out of the room and shut the door behind me, locking it as I went. I continued my rounds, but my nerves were shot. Around 4 a.m., I was sitting in the security office, watching the security feeds on the monitors, when I saw something that made me jump. On one of the cameras, which was positioned in the hallway where the mysterious room was, I saw a dark figure moving from one end of the hallway to other. It was just a shadow, but it was moving in a way that no one walked before. I rewound the footage and watched it again, but the figure was gone. It was like it had never been there in the first place. I was beginning to feel more than a little freaked out. I tried to call a friend to talk, but the old building had a terrible cell reception and I couldn't get through. The rest of the shift was a blur. I kept checking the hallway and the room, but nothing else ever happened. When 6 a.m. finally came, I was relieved to be done for the night. I walked out of the building as the sun began to rise, feeling a sense of both dread and relief. The next day, I decided to do a bit of research on the hospital. I wanted to find out if there was any history that might explain the strange things I had experienced. I went to the local historical society and dug through some old archives. I found out that the hospital had a dark past. During the 1950s, there had been a series of mysterious deaths among the patients. Some people believed that it was due to neglect, but others said that something more sinister might have been going on. The hospital had been closed after a scandal was left to decay over the years. The more I read, the more unsettled I became. I had always thought that ghosts were just stories, but the things I experienced that night made me question everything. I tried to tell my coworkers about what happened, but they just laughed it off as my imagination. I eventually quit the job. I couldn't handle the feeling of being watched and the eerie events that seemed to happen only when I was alone. I found another job, and though I still think about the night, I try not to dwell on it too much. I try not to dwell on it too much. Have any of you had similar experience in abandoned or old buildings? Share it here. Thanks for listening to my story.
It was an unusually bitter winter in the northern mountains when I arrived. I had gone there, like many before me, seeking solitude and peace. The city's relentless noise and my overstuffed life were weighing down on me, and I needed an escape. My cabin, an old structure built in the early 1900s, was nestled deep in the woods, far from any cities. It was everything I could have hoped for, a quiet, remote, and surrounded by an ocean of towering pines and snow. The days were still, save for the occasional sound of the wind howling through the trees. The nights were colder than I had ever known, with a stifling, bone-chilling chill that seemed to penetrate even the thickest layer of clothing I was wearing. But it was perfect. At first, I spent the days walking through the forest, taking in the quiet beauty of the snow-covered landscape, feeling like I had all the time in the world to think and heal. The first night I spent in the cabin, and I slept soundly, lulled up by the silence. But something was wrong on the second night. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night to a sound of scratching at the door. I thought it was a bird or some other animal searching for food, but there was something different about the noise. It wasn't random or frantic, it was deliberate, slow, like something was testing the door, feeling it, and tried to enter inside. My heart thumped in my chest as I cautiously got out of my bed and moved toward the door. I grabbed a flashlight, my hand shaking. There, in the cold dim light, I peered through the crack in the door. Outside, nothing moved. I could see only the moonlight reflecting off the snow. No animals, no wind, not even a whisper of any sound. The scratching had stopped, but I could feel something in the air, a strange, oppressive stillness that made the hair on my back of the neck stand up. I laughed to myself, trying to calm my nerve. Just the wind, I muttered, though even I didn't believe myself. I spent the rest of the night with one ear open, listening for anything unusual, but for my surprise, nothing came. I eventually fell asleep again, but the unsettling feeling still lingered. The next morning, the sun was hidden behind the thick clouds, casting the world in shades of grey. The air was bitter cold as I stepped outside, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. It didn't take long before I saw the first sign: footprints. The prints were large, too large to be from any human I had ever known. The stride was unnaturally long, and the prints themselves sank deep into the snow, as though they could carry an immense weight. But there was something more disturbing. They weren't entirely human. There was something wrong with them, something that made my stomach ache. I followed the footprints, unsure of what I expected to find. The tracks led deeper into the woods, toward the dense forest behind the cabin. The trees here were older, their trunks twisted and gangled. The farther I went, the air grew colder, and the wind became a faint whisper through the trees, almost like voices murmuring us out of the reach. The deeper I ventured, the more I noticed. The trees seemed different here. They weren't bent in strange shapes, almost as if they were reacting to something hidden within the shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, but whenever I turned around, nothing was there. It was a feeling I couldn't explain, but it was weighing down on me. But still, I pushed forward. After what felt like hours, I saw it, a figure standing in the distance between two massive trees. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light or the movement of the trees in the wind. But as I took a step closer, the figure did not move. It was tall, far too tall for any human. Its limbs were long, too long, and its skin was pale, stretched tight over its skeletal form. Its face, though, was what truly terrified me. It had no visible eyes, only deep, dark pits where they should have been, and its mouth was impossibly wide, filled with teeth that looked far too sharp and far too many. And I looked on its head. It has antlers like deer's, but it was bigger. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind refusing to believe what I was seeing. The creature made no movement, no sound at all. It simply stood there, staring at me, or at least I thought it was staring. The absence of eyes only made its gaze more oppressive, like it was looking into my very soul. I couldn't move. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything, but my body betrayed me. I couldn't do a single thing except standing there and watch the creature staring back at me. Then, as if it had grown tired of simply observing, it moved, unnaturally fast, gliding toward the trees without making a sound. And then, just like that, it was gone. I stayed frozen for what felt like an eternity. My mind couldn't process what I had just witnessed, and my body was stiff with fear. When I finally managed to turn around and run, my legs barely carried me. It was as if the creature's gaze had rooted me to the spot, preventing me from escaping, from leaving that place all at once. I sprinted back to the cabin, my breath coming in sharp gasps. But when I reached it, I didn't feel any safe. The forest outside seemed to be closing in on me. The trees taller, the shadows darker. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me, and sat in the corner. The night was worse. It started with that scratching again. This time, it was louder, more frantic, and then I heard the breathing, a low and rasping, like something struggling to get air. It came from just outside the cabin. I tried to ignore it at first, but then the sound grew, louder and louder. It circled the cabin, moving with a slow, methodical pace. My heart raced, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. I knew I wasn't alone in there. I wasn't alone in my cabin, and I wasn't alone in the woods. The night passed, and the following days were a blur of terror. Every time I ventured outside, I found more signs, more footprints, more broken branches, more sign of something watching me. I no longer ventured far from the cabin, too afraid to stray too far into the woods. The creature, whatever it was, seemed to be always present, always just out of the sight, but I could feel it following me, breathing down my neck. Each night, the sound grew louder, the scratching, the breathing, and the whispers. They were no longer confined to the outside. Sometimes I could hear them inside the walls of the cabin, as if the creature had found a way, as if the creature had found its way inside. The Wendigo. I had heard stories before, stories told around like campfire by the old man who spoke in hushed tones, tales of a creature that hunted the lost, a spirit of hunger, of insatiable greed. But I never thought they were real. I never thought the creature of the legend would come for me. But it had. It was real and it was haunting me. One night, I woke to a sound unlike any other heard before. It was a low growl, almost unimaginable, but it came from just outside the window. I knew, without a doubt, it was the creature again. My heart hammered in my chest, my throat dry. The growl became louder, more insistent, and then the scratching began again. But this time, it wasn't just at the door. It was at the window, at the roof, at the walls. The creature was everywhere this time. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. The terror of it, of the thing outside, was enough to drive me mad. I tried to live, but every time I stepped outside, the world seemed darker, more oppressive. I could feel it getting closer. The hunger, the need, the darkness of it. I was losing track of the time, losing track of myself. I no longer knew what day it was or how long I had been there. Then one night, I decided I will escape from here. I will escape from the cabin. I stood up, staring into the door, staring into my windows. I can see the moonlight shimmering through the streets. I just opened the door and just ran, closing my eyes. I never run like this before. I didn't stop. While running, I can hear the voice. I can hear footsteps behind me. But I didn't stop for nothing. I just kept running, leaving my things behind in the cabin. I don't know how far or how long I ran. Those days and those nights, they were never going to stop haunting me. I just escaped by an inch. Hope you guys like this video. If you did, please consider subscribing to this channel. Enable the bell icon so you don't miss new uploads. And also check out other videos in this channel too. Like them and share them. And if you have any suggestions or any improvements I need to make in this channel, please post them in the comment section. Till next time, this is Malayali Wendigo. Bye.